Hello, welcome to the Reloading Podcast here on the Firearms Radio Network. Tonight we've got a special guest all the way from Australia, but we'll talk to him in a minute. First, I want to take time to thank Jake and Ryan over at Patriot Patch Company for their bandwidth sponsorship and show off the August patch of the month again. First, I want to take time to thank Jake and Ryan over at Patriot Patch Company for their bandwidth sponsorship. And I want to thank Sean and the gang over at Firearms Radio Network for giving us a place to hang out every week. So, Jason, what you been up to?
Working.
Riveting. Just riveting.
Stop asking me. It's my busy season.
Why? Just because there's no snow on the ground?
Exactly.
Okay. Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
What you been up to?
Texting Shirenda.
That's what you've been doing all week?
No, not all week.
Wow.
Texting Shirenda to tell her to get herself online. Anyway, no, I have done nothing.
You've done nothing either? Slacker.
Yep.
What you been up to, Shirenda?
Well, I just got back from Georgia.
What was you doing down in Georgia?
It was my nephew's first birthday and my first time meeting him. And since I was down that way, I went shooting with the Georgia Shooting Connection guys.
Nice. Excellent. How are they doing?
Oh, they're doing pretty good. Fun bunch. Troublemakers. You know, I don't even want to. I'll just shoot 3 and they give me evil looks and I'd have to shoot more of their ammo.
Right.
You don't tell a guy that with that carries guns, you're not going to shoot up his ammo when he tells you to.
Right. I mean, you gotta. Somebody's gonna hand you ammo to shoot. You're like, well, yes, I will.
Yep. And took my sister with one of my sisters with me, so she
oh, nice.
went shooting too. So Jim, I did your advice.
What'd you do?
Your ending advice.
What's that?
Take a new shooter shooting.
Yay! My tagline.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And did she like it?
She did. She's addicted.
Well done.
Yep.
Well done.
And I'm waiting for my cousin to get here so she can take her hunter's education course undisturbed so I can take her hunting this season. So that's it.
Well, congratulations on painting everybody's face green, Shirenda. We were all jealous as sin of you and Chico. I saw that picture. I wanted to ask. I can't find that picture, by the way. But anyway, I saw that picture and it's like either Chico's in Missouri or Shirenda's in Georgia.
I was in Georgia.
And I'm about 6 hours away from where she was.
Oh, I didn't know. Well, that was a long drive for just one day.
It would have been.
Yeah. But they were in literally the same city as my nephew.
Oh, absolutely.
Alrighty. Well, I worked all weekend, so that was pretty much what I did. Did a little organizing out in the garage, but not much. I was kind of bummed. We actually got some CCI 400s into Cabela's on Friday, but the time I got there at 4, they were all gone.
Oh, damn.
So I go to I jokingly go to the hunting guy. I'm like, no, I thought we talked about this before. If we get small rifle and small pistol primers, you need to hide them for me. And he goes, you dang well know I can't do that. So, but yeah, I mean, if I don't know how things are down under, Kevin, but right now in the States, we can't find small pistol or small rifle primers anywhere.
Well, look at our situation. What you consider is a shortage, that we consider that as standard. We have one powder manufacturer in Australia. Yep. They shut down 2 years ago and haven't made a grain of powder since. Yeah, there are limits in how much you can hold in stockpile. But of course, they then sold it all to the US anyway. So you guys have powder overflowing from the benches compared. I literally have about 4 kilograms of powder left, and that'll have to last me until June next year. With the IPSC World Shoot was supposed to be on in December or late November, December this year. Luckily, it got deferred because probably 3/4 of the people in Australia wouldn't have been able to go, simply because they wouldn't have had enough powder to train and make their match ammunition for the match. We physically can't get it. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. People were organising to working out, okay, I'm on the Australian team, I'll need 20 kilograms of powder to practice for the 6 months up to it and for the ammunition. Can't get it. So, yeah, well, this is what we have to deal with on a regular basis. It's crazy.
That's absurd.
Rules here are obscene, and we have no rights for firearms. They consider it a legal privilege rather than a right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been that way for about a bit over 20 years now. It sucks.
Yeah.
In technical terms.
So is there anybody that's looking to step up and fill the void, not necessarily as a manufacturer, but an importer?
Oh, look, a lot of people do that regularly, but when in doubt, the government just simply introduces more rules and regulations, and bringing a container, shipping a container of propellant into Australia isn't that hard, but the paperwork is. You could take 18 months to be able to get approval to ship a container in. The cost to handle it, not on the ship, but on the actual wharf and have it moved to a magazine storage is serious. It's a serious cost. You have to be able to lease the cost in a magazine battery. You have to not exceed that magazine battery's capacity of class propellant. And despite the fact we're a really big country, we don't have the magazine batteries aren't that big. They're actually using the military magazine batteries for domestic propellant storage, which scares the hell out of me. Not so much that, it just means that the military doesn't actually have that much in storage, which they should have.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. The rules and regulations here are only designed to affect the people who are willing to obey the laws. It's right. It's a major point of contention with us. You guys, you can walk down to a range with a couple of hundred people all walking around with guns in holsters. I don't get concerned. Everybody is watching everybody carefully. They're all well trained, well behaved in the main. Not concerned. What scares me is when you walk down the main street and you see some of the idiots there, whereas the guys on the ranges, never concerned. Not once. Never had a concern. So yeah, we're very limited in what we can do in our rules and regulations. They even treat empty brass cases as live rounds under Australian law. Yeah.
Wow.
Welcome to the land of Oz.
Yeah, it's not about guns, it's about control.
Yeah. And you're moving that way towards yourself. If the various different groups get the wrong groups get in, they won't go after the guns, they'll go after everything else. That's what they did in Australia. If they couldn't stop the guns, the first thing they did is they tried to bring in permit systems for primers here. It didn't get through, but they'll bring in permit systems for primers, propellant. They're doing what they're doing in California.
Yeah.
It's
you just tickled question marks funny bone. He's from the land of fruits and nuts.
Yep.
Yep, and drop bears.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thing is they start, and that's what they've been doing for the last 30 years is they've been rolling out gun control laws in California, and if they stick in California, then they try and spread them nationwide. Yeah. But yeah, unfortunately, you guys got a real shaft on that one. So, so
it all started from the Port Arthur massacre.
Right.
A guy who was known to be a nutcase was known to have access to illegal guns. That's all been proven. The gun that he used had been surrendered to the police for destruction a few years previously. There was never an open or public inquiry about that. How did he have access to those guns? Recreation, or when people have tried to recreate the shooting scenario, there's a lot of inconsistencies about where people died and how they were shot and aspects of it. Even the records regarding mortuary photography and things like that, stuff that is, whenever things happen, there are certain protocols. All of that information was taken off the undertakers and taken into security. There's just so many things behind that whole process that just don't line up. It's not just one or two items. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but when everything like that is hidden, it says to me there's some pretty major failings in the process, and there's never been an open and frank discussion about the failings of the government processes. Like even New Zealand, the shooting in New Zealand was horrific, but he applied to 3 separate clubs, and the 3 separate clubs wrote letters to the police saying, do not let this guy have a license. We do not feel comfortable with it. And like that takes a fair bit for a club to say, do not let this guy have a gun. They did not want him in the club. 3 clubs knocked him back. And luckily we have the right by the police to say no to any prospective member, Australia and New Zealand. But no, the police just gave him the license anyway.
Yeah. And
history is history, as we know. So, yeah. But we can't, there's only so many things you can do with that, but it's sad all the same. Particularly is that some of the most honourable and ethical people I've ever met have been active and competitive shooters. I've met guys all around the world, and so they've been some of the nicest people you could ever possibly meet.
Yeah, I mean, the shooting community as a whole is amazing. I mean, just an example, when you're out at, especially like range day for SHOT, everybody's, if they're, people will turn around all the time and say, hey, did you want to hop in? Did you want to go first? And it's, and you go out to the range, especially like competition days, when any of the competition groups are there, and you start wondering, it's not going to be long before somebody's going to put a firearm in your hand and say, okay, so this is what we do and this is how we do it. Here, have fun. So, I mean, it's just an amazing group. And yeah, going back to Port Moresby, I've read quite a bit on that. And even the newspaper articles, if you pull the newspapers from that day and the 3 days after, the story changes drastically from the original day to the 4th day. And there's no valid reason for it. So,
yeah, the Port Arthur was a tragedy of monumental proportions, and I absolutely loathe, and I don't even joke about gun safety, even amongst my close friends within the shooting community, and I've never ever said that in a work environment. I just don't think it's funny, and I don't think people need that sort of grief. But when that sort of thing happens, and as a result, they take all the guns off us, which, by the way, the laws wouldn't have affected anything to do with Port Arthur because the guns he used were illegal then. But the other part is that we lost castle doctrine. We lost the right for self-defense. Now, probably 99% of the people in Australia do not understand what that means. We do not have the legal right for self-defense. It has to be, there is no reasonable provision in the situation. In the US, you have castle doctrine. Once inside that front gate, you're anybody's fair game if there is a reasonable case that that person was threatened. Right. We do not have that right. There have been a number of case laws in Australia where we tried to get that changed, and the police dropped those situations, but mainly now we don't have it. And that's probably the biggest thing. Anyway, that's my gripe for the process.
Yeah, but it's important for our audience to hear this, because a lot of our audience, I mean, we do have Canadians, we have Australians, we have Europeans that listen, but the bulk of our audience is American. And we don't really delve into politics much, but having you on and you gone through this whole mess and saw what happened from the jump and how they did what they did, it's important for our listeners here to hear that so that they're more aware and more willing to jump in and help stop what they're trying to do here. So, but,
the Australian philosophy is generally fairly multicultural. We're fairly easygoing. The only time we really get concerned is if somebody walks in and says, "You shall do this." It's about the only time you'll get somebody's back up. They're pretty easygoing. Now, that can cover anything such as the government interfering or the various extreme groups, right and left, telling us, "Oh, Black Lives Matter, Black do this, do that, Aboriginal lives matter." Yeah, they all matter, and it's nothing there. But when people say, "My right is to go and loot and burn down your property because of something that happened 200 years ago," there's some pretty sensitive issues that within Australia as well too. We have the same issues, and we went through some very horrible things in Australia. But our biggest issue is that we try and get along. We try and work our way through it.
Yep.
But the problem with the gun laws is that we have the very vocal minority, and what I'm seeing now in the US as well as in Australia, that very quiet majority is now actually starting to learn that, hey, you only have to have a little bit of noise from every individual person, and that collectively makes a hell of a big noise. And yeah, I'm hoping that the silent majority is not going to be quite so silent anymore.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Well, yeah, same here. Somebody claims a particular position, and the louder they get, and if they don't give that one person credit, then they get called a racist or everything else. We have the same problem here. We have people screaming that guns are the evil. No. What about the fact that the police didn't do their job? That the governments didn't do their job? Where's their failings? And the laws were there always. So it's a very contentious issue, and the reality is that everybody has to take ownership of what they're actually doing. My biggest issue is be nice. It doesn't hurt.
right.
There's a lot of really nice people out there, and I've only ever met one or two people in my entire lifetime that I just really don't want to have anything to do with. But most people have been there, and done things that I'll never see or understand. So they've got their life. I'll listen to what they've got to say. I get some great stories from people at SHOT Show. Some of the things that they've done, guys who have served. I have the greatest respect for all of those. My family has had extensive history in the military, and quite extensive and long and proud history of it. Always give the greatest amount of support for them. It's one of the charities that we do is that, particularly with veterans on PTSD, if there's we do a little show or a sample, we say, okay, you want to go and use one of the roll sizes at one of the matches. We say, okay, right, a gold coin donation, get a handful of cases, put it in the jar, goes to a PTSD, and we just send them a check at the end of every month, see how it goes.
Awesome.
Cost me nothing, and and more often than not, people will just simply go and throw a couple of coins, $5 in just for the hell of it, even if they don't use one of my machines. It's a way of paying it forward.
Yeah. So you mentioned roll sizing, and your name says Kevin, rollsizer.com. So first off, how did you get into reloading?
I grew up on a farm in southern New South Wales. Farmers, guns are tools. That's it. Yeah, yep. You get out there, grow up on the farm. Dad, we'd have to go out and shoot feral cats, occasionally the odd snake. Almost everything we have that walks and crawls in Australia is deadly. Town dogs that are going to take down our sheep. I grew up learning how to shoot. I could put a bullet in the eye of a feral dog at 100 yards. I grew up to be fairly competent. Injury in a car accident stopped me shooting too much rifle, too much impact on the shoulder. Yep, exactly. So I got into handgun shooting. I've always been interested in it, but was never suitable on the farm. So I got into the shooting at a local club. Got holster qualified. I think Canadians call it black badge or something similar.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you guys call it. And got into that. Didn't get a lot of information. Got a lot of mythical stories about reloading. Being a mechanical engineer of 30 years experience, I tended to be a little bit fussy about information, and whatever somebody said, I'd usually check it up. And if I didn't find 3 or 4 other references saying it, do it that way, ask more questions. So got into reloading, shot for a while. My son was very keen on shooting, and at the age 11 wanted to get involved with prac pistol shooting. Started him out with the 9mm, shooting a Tanfolio/CZ, great gun, but they were a bit sensitive to ammunition. In Australia, as you're probably aware, our costs are very high for ammunition. So we reload. We pick up our own brass and we reload and reload and reload. 30, 40 plus reloads is not uncommon for our cases. My last lot of brass went through over 40 reloads in major. Works perfectly. It was getting so thin you could push your thumbnail in the side case and it would dent it. That says to me I had good fair life out of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got him shooting, and we eventually moved him over to a 357 SIG, which is the Australian approved equivalent of 40 cal for standard major or your limited major. Jack Wilson will tell you a 357 SIG is very effective. Yeah,
Indeed.
Jim, I thought you'd like that. Yes.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Just as effective, if not more effective than a 40 cal, but that's what we use. Now we use 40 cal brass for that because it's readily available and cheap.
Yeah.
The problem is slightly lighter pressure, not based on a 10mm case, it's a 40 case, lower pressure rating, slightly unsupported or more relaxed chamber size, the cases were blowing out. Now, 357 SIG is not a very nice case to deal with nosediving and reliable feeding unless you're using OEM magazines, and then you have to use OEM correct dimensions. We were shooting his 357 SIG in an STI 2011 platform. Now, those cases were nosediving all the time, and so I then launched into a process of trying to understand why. Now, there are the 3 major issues were, 1, magazine springs were gutless. Surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Second one was that the overall length was wrong. You have to load them out to the maximum you can reliably feed out of the magazine, not SAMI specification length. The second one is you absolutely have to have the cases shaped correctly. Now, the case shaping was the one that was the hardest to deal with. Roll sizing has been around for a long, long time. It's Schrach and Case Pro, and there's a few other people have made their own versions of it, but I tried 3 different Case Pros in Australia, and they're rare as rocking horse poo to find, and incredibly expensive and not very user-friendly as far as automation. And I looked at how they worked, and I realised these can't bring the cases down to the correct size because of their in my opinion, what their mechanical limitation is. They're a good product, but I thought I could make a better version, so I did. I designed my own and started out with what is essentially seen as the commercial roll sizer, we've been selling those online now for 3 years now, and they're designed basically to bring a section of the case that the normal reloading process cannot reach. Once you get that sorted, your standard reloading press can make factory grade dimensioned ammunition. And once we started doing that, we started prototyping and working out exactly what those dimensions would be. Everything just fell into place. We found after the fact there's a whole lot of other things that actually started working and fixing a lot of problems that weren't immediately obvious. But the process of developing the roll size that came out as a direct need. We then we then had a whole bunch of people who were saying, "Oh, can you do one for 9mm for me? Can you do one in this caliber? And can you do one in this caliber?" And the business started with a very good friend of mine, Joe Sullivan, who is an IROA he floats between the States and Australia on a regular basis. And he pretty much at every major competition, rifle or pistol competition in the States and or in many of the European countries, as well as Australia, he's often there range as an RO. He said to me, "For God's sake, Kevin, make these and sell these because I know people who want them." And within 2 weeks, he had lined up a dozen people who actually wanted one simply because of what Joe said. Joe had seen one of the machines. He was one of the first people to buy one. And at that point, I had proof of concept and went to the bank and said, "Give me some money." And that was 3 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. As a mechanical engineer, having worked in the mining industry, the mining industry is notoriously unforgiving for machinery. So their attitude is, if in doubt, double it and double it again. And that was the attitude I took. The machinery is pretty robust. It's not necessarily cheap, but the thing about it is when people are looking for a machine and they're spending a large amount of money on the machine, they expect it to last. My attitude is, well, try once and it'll last, and enjoy it for the next 20 plus years. And people have seen that. So yeah, the roll size of business has gone gangbusters. The biggest issue is getting people to read the manual. They're pretty simple machines, but they operate in a very, very complex way.
Buy once, cry once.
Yeah. The one guy who's got quite a number of my machines has done over 20 million cases on a commercial roll sizer. So he's done all right. He's done all right. He reckoned he got a fair bit of life out of that base, and he replaced it after 3 years. So, and it was a very cheap rebuild cost on that machine. But 20 million cases, and I think he hadn't even gone through. He hadn't even replaced any of the bog standard spare parts that he had on the machine. So
that's more than a buttload, more than a boatload.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many did you get in a
20 mil? Come on, that's like a million boxes of let's see, 750,000 boxes of ammunition if it's all handgun ammo.
Yeah, it was. That was doing just 9mm.
Oh my God, that's great. I'm glad there's that much ammo out there.
Yeah, well, I think he produces a couple of 100,000 rounds a week. He didn't tell me exactly what he's got, but he's doing, I think it was 500,000 rounds a week or so processing. The interesting thing is almost everything that he processes, he reloads probably 3/4 of it, and everything that goes through a Camdex is roll sized. That's a separate discussion, which we'll cover a little bit later if you want.
Yeah,
that's a separate one. But yeah, no, they're pretty hardcore machines. They look simple, but there's only 4 companies in Australia that can actually do the CNC machining that I require to the accuracy and tolerances that I require. So yeah, it's been a very interesting exercise from a technical perspective, being able to mass-produce machines like this and be able to get them accurate and consistent. It's very difficult.
Affordable.
Well, yeah, I could certainly make these a lot more expensive, and I would still sell them. But at the end of the day, I've made them as affordable as I can, and still be able to make it a sustainable business.
No, don't misunderstand me, sir. I meant affordable in the manufacturing process, not affordable to me, the end user, yet. I hadn't gone there.
No, but at the end of the day, one of the guys who made the comment about his Camdexes, Camdexes were designed for reloading new cases. They were not designed for reloading fired cases. Now, as a show of hands, who here reloads? Mike, do you reload? Yep. Jason, you do? Okay. Jim, you reload?
Shirenda.
Shirenda, are you reloading yet? Oh, excellent. Okay. Now,
Sorry, I got noise in the background. Yes, I do.
okay. So we've all seen what reloading is about. Okay. You size the case. Now, the problem is that that very last little bit is always pretty stiff, isn't it? And the
Absolutely.
downward stroke. Now,
Because
is anybody...
you're losing leverage, so where you gain pressure, but it takes increased leverage to give you that pressure.
Well, actually, Jim, I'm not sure that that's quite right, because you're right. You say you're losing leverage. You're not. If you actually look at the cam mechanism on your reloading press, you're actually gaining leverage, because you're actually that lovely little thing called camming over. Yeah, that camming over is a mechanical advantage about 5 to 1 than it is on the downward stroke. Now, if you're camming over and you're finding it hard on a camming over with a 5 to 1 advantage, how much work are you doing on that case? All of a sudden you start thinking, oh yeah, it is. You actually see that little cam over, just that it rolls over, and that little mechanical advantage is quite significant. Now, the Camdex doesn't see that camming over function. So when you're actually bringing the Camdex plate down on a fired case, it's seeing that bulge at the bottom. What happens? The plate bends, the bushes burn out on the actual Camdex, and every 6 months you're up for quite a few $1,000s in rebuilding Camdexes. Now, you roll size the case, you remove that bulge, and all of a sudden, that's it. It doesn't burn out anymore. And we've had a lot of the guys who said, oh, no, we don't actually need roll sizing, but they did it simply because it stopped them burning out their Camdexes, their bushes and guide bushes every 6 months. That costs more than a roll sizer does in its own right. And then you're looking at downtime and having to reset your Camdex and everything else. So from a business, roll sizes on Camdexes or ammo loads starts becoming a very short conversation. So we had a guy at SHOT Show turn up and say, he has 23 Camdexes and 13 roll sizes. And since he's put roll sizes in for that caliber, he hasn't actually had to rebuild that machine once. And he would be up for $4,000 minimum for a rebuild on his Camdex. So if you're a commercial processor and you're not using reman during fired brass, it's a very short and very simple conversation. But anyway. But one of the things that we found out of the process is, as you've all seen with the reloading, how many times have you guys actually found your ammunition doesn't go through your gun? Have you ever had many jams or failure to feed or not to quite go into battery?
I'll be honest, and I'll tell you, sometimes my 357 ammo won't go in.
Moon clipped?
Beg your pardon?
Is it moon clipped or?
Oh no, it's in just a 357 ammunition in a 357 revolver. Doesn't need.
Okay. So it's not a moon clipped arrangement or
no, sir.
Okay. That's an interesting one which we've talked about with specifications. Ammunition is made to be the ammunition, the guns, the chambers are all designed. When I use the word designed, that's a very loose concept around a set of rules called the SAMI specifications. These are the rule books to define case size, dimensions, tolerances. Tolerances are there, but most people don't realize that. And those tolerances cover length, width, and the shape. Now, the revolvers tend to be much tighter tolerances than semi-autos. That's given. Generally, semi-autos have a 0.15 millimeter tolerance when the revolvers have, semi-autos have 0.15 millimeter and semi-autos have 0.1 millimeters. So they're much tighter. So it's 50% tighter straight away. Okay. So whenever people talk about how revolvers are more accurate, there's actually a lot of the reasons because of the tighter tolerances. They're also genuinely fully supported. You have a rim, because your rim is right up against the back of the cylinder, it's fully supported. So when people talk about consistency and accuracy, revolvers tend to be accurate for that reason. Also because you don't have loose chambers, barrel links, barrel to slide, slide to frame fits. They tend to be more accurate. But they also tend to be more sensitive to ammunition. Now, when you size the case, what I love showing people as an exercise is when you have a fired case, you clean it. If you coated the entire round in a black permanent marker and then full length sized it, a lot of people would be quite surprised to realise exactly how much of the bottom of the case is not actually touched by the sizing die, the full length sizing die.
That is a fact.
Yeah, it's not a full length sizing die. Doesn't matter what it says. Even if you use those wonderful things called small base circle, small base dies, even those physically cannot get down to the bottom. Why?
Because of the shell.
There's a shell plate in the way, guys. And
Yep.
you look at that, and there's also a little bell on the mouth, etc. Now, this is not a reflection on the dies or the manufacturers. This is called physics, guys. You have to have a shell plate. You physically cannot get the sizing die down all the way. So this is the thing that we found out in the roll sizing process. When you roll size that bottom, say, a third of an inch, half an inch of the case, and bring it back into a factory size, the sizing die all of a sudden tends to work a hell of a lot less. Now, I've got friends who are on the wrong end of 80, great guys, very active, but hey, after 80, you have some use by dates on things called shoulder joints and arm joints. They physically can't reload for more than 100 rounds at a go because of the effort on their shoulder. This guy was done a lot for our local club, so I donated him a demonstration roll sizer, a little manual one, and he roll sized all his cases. He did that in the weekend, and he then proceeded to load 400 cases in a single run. And he's never done that before. He's never been able to do more than 100. And the reason he did that is because the effort on his arm and shoulder was so much less. Hey. So once you actually, the roll sizer does a lot of work, and it's not obvious. The other part that the roll sizer does, it not just gets it back to a factory size, but a lot of people don't understand what factory sizes are about. With all of you guys, you'd all probably be quite comfortable about the concept of shooting factory ammo. You know it's always going to be reliable. Have you all had that experience?
You got to be kidding me. Factory ammo always reliable?
Well, I'll cover that shortly. But it's a lot more reliable. But the reason for that is because factory ammo is made in the middle of the range. When we talked about specifications, there's the SAMI specifications. If you go and look it up online, you'll see this case dimension that has all the sizes and everything. But if you spend some time looking at that drawing, it actually describes these are the maximum dimensions. Now, the reloading process you use, depending upon the dies, makes, calibers, the function that you're using, the reloading press that you use is also quite a bit of an impact. All of those processes tend towards the upper limit of the SAMI specification. So if you're lucky, most of them will actually be at that size, the largest of the sizes, or in most cases, just a bit bigger. That works for a lot of people because guns are, in general, very tolerant, but there are limits. Now, the factory ammunition is not the maximum size and it's not the minimum size. It's about halfway in between. Now, halfway in between is what we would term as factory. Now, I've measured hundreds of different makes and models of cases and brass. And Jim, as you said, some factory ammunition is not reliable. Why? I've seen how they make it. They ain't consistent. Generally, the better quality ammunition, the name brand ammunition, the more reliable it's going to be and much more consistent. I've seen factory ammunition that have been out of boxes, brand new. Now, it's all obviously brand new ammunition, that wooden case gauge. It's garbage. Why? It's poor quality ammunition. Statistically, you will get that. The thing about roll sizing is that it allows you to be able to get, with everything else, it allows you to get the part of the case that is not able to be sized correctly. It gets it back the middle range dimension. And the other part, which is very poorly understood, and when we talk about specifications and tolerances, it is concentric. Now, I'm sure you've all picked up the odd case on the ground that's probably been shot in a 9 major. They look pretty ugly, don't they? Have you seen how much they bulge out on the side? Okay. When it blows out, let's call it pregnant. Okay, it's bulged out on one side. There's a big bulge on the side. You clean it and then you size it. Now, if you think about that case as a column of clay, you can have your nice little Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze clay scene and squeeze the column of clay down. Now, Shirenda, no comment there, please. What actually happens is the actual center of the case shifts. And that's the part that a lot of people don't get. It's not obvious. And you can actually see it. Hands up who actually reloads on a 650. Okay, right. Have you ever found a situation where you've sized a case and at the powder funnel section, your powder funnel's taken a bite out of the case mouth? Have you seen that? Yep. Jason, you're nodding. Mike, you're nodding it. Okay. That is a perfect example of the case being sized and shifting. Now, when it shifts, it actually moves the whole shell plate. So when your powder dropper comes down, it takes a chunk out of your mouth. That is a perfect example, and it does happen. If you're looking at it very, very carefully, once you're aware of it, you can actually see the case. It sizes down. The case is orientated correctly so that it physically pushes the shell plate around. It only has to push it around a 16th or a 1/25th of an inch, a 50th of an inch. It's a very small amount. But all of a sudden, that powder funnel takes a chunk out of your mouth. And that's because the sizing die is the shell plate is moving because the center of the case has moved. Now, a lot of people, oh no, it doesn't happen. No, it does actually happen, and I've measured it. A lot of people don't see that. And so when you roll size your case, you get that case factory size and concentric. It doesn't matter because it forces it back to the center of the base. The bottom of your case, in most cases, with the exception of stuff that you probably haven't been able to buy for 40 or 50 years, modern cases are rated to a plus P plus rating. You can still get plus P cases in revolvers, say a 38 Smith & Wesson case, or some of the lighter pressure cases. A lot of those cases are lighter construction, but in the main, the base of the case, where the primer pocket is, that's almost solid brass, and there's usually fairly heavy reinforcement around the base to the lower section of the webbing. When you get that section of the base and maybe the first quarter of an inch of the case above that base of your case, when you get that concentric, the rest of the reloading process falls into place very easily. It's sort of like getting your foundation. If you get the foundation of that case correctly sized, the reloading process is much, much more consistent. Your case shape's consistent. It's concentric, and it actually makes your chronograph results, your accuracy, your feeding, your magazine performance much more consistent. The SAMI specifications we've talked about previously, they have an upper and a lower dimension. Now, if you're feeding that in a double stack magazine, and as we all see them, they stack like that on top of the magazine. Okay. What happens if that case becomes undersized? Instead of stacking at 45 degrees, they stack at 15 degrees. Now, if you size it a little bit smaller than that, what happens then? Eventually, it'll lock up in your magazine. Now, as an exercise, which you could possibly do after the fact, grab some factory ammunition that's been well made, put it in a double stack magazine, tap it down to settle it down into the magazine. Okay, then give it a rattle. Okay, then unload that same magazine, load it with remanufactured or reloaded ammunition, and do the same thing. You'll find that in most cases, the reloaded ammunition rattles a lot more. And the reason for that is because of this stacking issue. When your ammunition works back and forth in the magazine, if it's shorter than the maximum length in your magazine, you're trying to not sneeze there, Mike. It actually causes a lot of rattling problems. Now, one of the biggest issues there is CZs. CZs and the Shadow 2s, Tanfolios, they're notorious for rattling magazines. When you roll size the ammunition, it takes away most of the rattling of the ammunition. Why? You're getting back to a factory size, it nestles properly in the magazine, and it feeds reliably. Hands up who's actually had a magazine cases lock up in the middle of a magazine. Who's had that?
Can't say that I have.
Yeah, I've been caught with it. What happened with me when I was using undersized dies, because of a bulge problem in the cases, the rounds were going massively undersized in the middle of the case. The magazine would lock up. I had to go away from that, and that was actually one of the things that pushed me towards the roll sizing process. It wasn't the middle of the case that was the problem, it was the base. So using a undersized die to deal with a bulge on the bottom of a case is sort of like actual eye surgery. Fix the problem rather than just simply squeeze the hell out of a case to try and fix something that it sort of fixes by default. Okay, when we often see a roll size case, we coat it with black permanent marker and put a standard sizing die over the top of it. What actually happens is that you leave about half an inch of texture mark on the bottom of the case. That shows you how far the sizing die doesn't actually touch now, because the rest of it is actually the correct size. Out of you guys, who chronographs their ammunition? Okay. Jim,
Coming soon.
what's the maximum, what's the typical variation you would get in your chronograph for your reloaded ammunition?
Oh, my 357 stuff that I chronographed a few years ago, I was getting anywhere about 55, 70 to 85 to even to 150, somewhere between 55 and 150 feet per second variation.
Ooh, that's a bit more than I normally see. Yeah. Okay. What about you, Jason? Jason or Shirenda, what's the variation that you normally see?
It's been a while, but I'd say probably a good 75.
And I haven't chronographed yet because I don't have anywhere to chronograph yet because of COVID. And also, I just got the chronograph thanks to Jason.
I do believe Mike was the one who has the other person that had the chronograph.
Yeah. No worries.
Yep.
What do you find as your variation, Mike?
For 9, it was, I'm trying to remember here. The load I settled on was 60 between the slowest and fastest.
Right. Okay. Typically what I've found out of my arrangement, now I'll clarify this, is because when I was loading on a 650 with the reloaded cases 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 times reloaded, I would get normally about 30 to 40 feet a second variation from the dead center, plus or minus 30 or 40 feet for the second variation. It's normal, possibly higher than what I've seen locally that people get, but it's normal. When I roll sized that ammunition, it went down to under 10 feet a second variation. And that's not just my results, that is consistently what we're seeing. Now, the reality is if you're shooting out to 25, 30 yards, you're not going to see the difference. But the other thing is that having that consistency, you're going to have a lot more confidence. If you're a very fast trigger puller, and you're down to the 0.12, 0.15 splits, and you've got a case that is inconsistently feeding, so it just chambers. It just comes off the feed ramp, out of the magazine, onto the feed ramp, into the battery, and it's just fitting in. It'll go into battery just a little bit slower. It'll go from a typical 0.05 of a second cycle time to about 0.09, 0.1. Now, I've had friends in the US who have actually used a high-speed resolution camera and show that, and they can see that between bulged cases and good quality cases, the actual cycle time does change quite dramatically. Now, if you're running 0.15, 0.18 splits, 0.11, I know guys who can do 0.11, 0.12 splits. My son can do 0.11 splits. Little bugger. He kicks my bum. They're very, very good. But the problem is, if you've got a case that is actually not going in a battery, what it's going to do is that, and you're there hosing away at a super short target, and it's all about speed, and that doesn't go into battery, that's when you have a zero. That's when it's dead center. How the hell did I miss? Boom, it's off the target. Why? Because it didn't go bang when you expected it to. Now, everybody seems to think, oh, hell, I'd know about it. No, you don't. I've actually seen people who swear black and blue who have been A's all day and running ridiculously tight splits. All of a sudden, bang, bang, missed. Why? Didn't go to battery. Now, I went and gave him the ammunition. He did the same thing again. He had it twice in one match and basically blew first. That was it. He lost the match. And this is where a lot of it comes down to. If you're plinking away in a garden, yeah, and does it really matter that you have a round that goes a little bit slower into battery? No, who cares? If you're just plinking away, slaughtering coffee cans and things like that, or just destroying bits of target out in the backyard, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to be too fussed about having a round that doesn't go into battery too much, as long as you're comfortable in dealing with it. But if you're in a competition environment and that going into battery or that one miss can take you off the podium, it makes a difference. I've seen, if you go to the big matches, like I went to the back-to-back at the USPSA, back-to-back in Florida just a bit over a year ago, and the difference between first and second was less than a second. First and second place in open was about 1 or 1.5 seconds, and about 6 points, if I remember correctly. What's a miss cost you? Even if you don't back it up, if you back it up, that's usually maybe half a second if you're really quick. But if you have a miss, that's 15 points straight away. Boom, you've lost first place. That is where the roll size starts coming into its own. You don't have, does it case gauge? Yes, you can go and check your ammunition. But the problem is that if your case is not consistently shaped, it will not handle consistently in a gun. Even if it works reliably, when we say reliably, it goes in every time. But the cadence and the control of the gun does change unless it's consistently shaped. Now, if you manage to pick up your neighbour's 9mm major cases and that you're reloading it, yes, it might gauge, but it could be all over the place as far as case shape. You could have 357 Magnum out of a guy who's running a heavily throated and moonclip gun, and his cases blow out. What's going to happen? It's not going to feed in reliably. And what the process is all about is not necessarily the fact that your normal reloading processes cannot pick ammunition that will gauge reliably. Of course you can. You can deal with that. But it's all about getting it so that it becomes 1 in every 5,000, 1 in every 1,000 that doesn't reliably feed. And that's when if you go into a major, you would always individually check your primers, the primers, the seating, the bullet, the crimp. You would do all of that. If you didn't, you probably are not that serious about your competition. But the one thing you cannot check, and it's almost impossible to check, is how do you get the consistent feeding into the chamber? Because it's actually really, really hard to pick up. A lot of the case gauges that people buy, such as the Lymans. And look, how many different makes are there? Probably 100. If you talk to the commercial reloaders, which ones do they use? They tend to use ones that are not chamber gauges. They use case gauges, and there is a difference. When you have the cases, okay, let's go back to the SAMI specifications. The SAMI specifications show a case dimension and a chamber dimension. And as we know about some of the high-end custom guns, the chamber dimension is often tighter. Now, that doesn't mean your reloading process can actually make any better ammunition. It just means that your chamber is tighter. Jason, you were saying that you weren't running moon clips. So that means, have you done any throating on that cylinder at all? Any reaming or anything like that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Then it's probably, traditionally, revolver chambers tend to be a little bit tighter. So even the slightest amount of bulging on a case will stop that from going in. Now, just because it goes in, if it sticks out even slightly, it won't freewheel around, will it? It'll catch on the base of the rim. That's a perfect example. Now, you've probably, I don't know, your batches, do you case gauge? Do you check them?
No, I don't.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. But your reloading process doesn't change between case to case, does it?
No, it does not.
No. So what's changed? What's changed is that every now and then you'll get a case that blows out a little bit. Wall thicknesses vary very slightly. Annealing differences on the cases varies slightly. It's called their production items. There is variation. Why is it different? The guys I talked to at Starline and at Federal, different cases have different levels of temper, different levels of annealing. If it's in a different position when the annealing process, it does change the characteristics of the case. That's something that we can't control. Unless you're going to go super scientific on your cases, you'd never find the difference. And honestly, that's probably way too much effort to try and understand. But the key thing is that why did it vary? Because there's normal variations in cases. Traditionally, cases between head stamps are very, very consistent in their operation. Traditionally, they're very, very consistent. But brass softness, brass hardness does vary. Who here has shot Federal non-toxic, Federal NT cases? Okay. A lot of the ammunition that's been used for military or police that is being crimped has not been considered for multiple reloads. We have to use it because it's too expensive. What we pay for a case alone, empty case, you guys could buy 2 or 3 loaded rounds in the US for. It cost me 38 cents to 40 cents for a Starline Super Comp case. And what do you buy 9mm or 9s? Pre-COVID, I'm talking about. What do you pay for your ammunition in the 9mm, standard 9mm?
Box of 50 115 grain FMJs was usually around $10, a little less depending on if you got it in sale or not.
Today I've seen it for $20 a box.
But that's $45-50 for us.
Yeah,
it's obscene. It's obscene pricing. So we have to recover and reload. It's not an option. That's why we get 40+ reloads. Why? We can't afford to shoot if we don't. It's hard. It's expensive enough as it is. So coming back to that, once you get the case consistency, well, everything else starts falling into place. What often bites people is you're shooting, say, 9mm Federal or Winchester brass, and you get somebody else's Winchester brass that's been flogged out and really should have been retired 20 years ago. You won't necessarily look at it. You'll see it. You'll reload it, and it'll jam up in your gun, and you'll swear black and blue, what the hell's happened? The answer is it's probably ready to be planted on the arc, some of that ammunition. Some of it is pretty average. If you can't see a head stamp, you can't see the markings on the head stamp, I'd have to say that's probably the point where you throw it in the bin.
Scrap it.
Yep.
Scrap it. Exactly. Now, one of the questions is that what happens to the internal dimensions when you're making the walls concentric to the base? Will it shift back or will it stretch like a bottle case, like a bottleneck cartridge? Okay, pistol cases traditionally shorten with multiple reloads. Why? You've got a sizing die that pushes down, it compresses the case, and it blows them out. When you reload 5, 10, 15, 20 times, the cases will progressively shorten. And the way you deal with that is you slowly adjust maybe an eighth of a turn on the powder funnel and the eighth of a turn on the seat and bullet crimp. Bullet seating tends not to have to vary that much because the overall length isn't affected, but the crimp does get affected. When you roll size, it doesn't increase the length of the case from OEM, it just removes the shrinkage. Now, it doesn't remove it completely, but if you're talking about 40 plus reloads, it'll have shrunk a little bit over time, but over maybe sort of 2 or 3 years, I probably only have to adjust the crimp 3 or 4 times in that year after 40 plus reloads. If I didn't roll size, I would have to adjust it probably every 2 months or every 3 months. And again, it comes back down to if your length is not changing, your neck tension doesn't change. If your neck tension doesn't change, your chronograph is going to be a lot more consistent. Your base dimensions are concentric and consistent. Your chronograph results have to be much more consistent. Does it mean you're having a perfect factory round? No. But as Jason, as you have said before, some factory ammo is really garbage. I've used brand new factory ammunition and had 15, 20 feet a second variation, and that's good. That's a good result. But at the Philippines match, at the Australasians match in the Philippines, the guy who supplied me the ammunition was one of my resellers. He buys brand new. He supplied us with brand new cases. They were all roll sized and then reloaded as standard. And we had 3 feet a second variation. Now, I think that's probably a little bit of a fluke, but the ammunition is very consistent. And it's basically just clover leaves at like about 30, 40 yards. It's clover leaves out of the gun. His guns are incredibly accurate, incredibly tight. But 3 feet a second variation is a freak of nature. It's extreme. I don't think even the world's best shooters could actually tell the difference with that sort of variation. But that's what I got. And most of the people who were using ammunition from this guy was all roll sized. And as far as I know, out of the 3.5 tons of ammunition that he supplied for that match, I don't think there was a single failure to feed. So it's pretty hardcore when you talk about that. This guy is the largest private manufacturer reloader of ammunition in the Philippines for true weight. So he's pretty serious about it. He's the man to go to. He makes some of the best guns in the Philippines, custom guns. But he does actually he is very, very careful about his ammunition. And a lot of people go to him and bring their cases and say, reload. He reloads it, cleans it, roll sizes it, reloads it for them. They're great. They don't care. So coming back to the issue, when you're dealing with rifle cases, like rifle cases stretch a lot anyway, especially if you haven't got your head spacing correctly. If you're reloading the same ammunition for 3 or 4 different guns, you'll have to set the head spacing the same for you'll have to hit the head spacing for the shortest chambered gun. That's pretty straightforward. Now, any of those guns that have got longer head spacings will stretch, and case head separation in rifle cases is a fairly common problem. The roll sizing process extends and it increases the length on the cases very slightly, but it doesn't increase the issue of you will probably need to full length size at the same time, but you'll probably find that on most of the situations that won't actually affect the actual case. You can neck tension it or whatever, but the roll sizing will get the cases back concentric and to a factory dimension. We get a lot of feedback from the guys shooting ARs in PCC and shooting AR platforms using rifle cases, 300 blackout, etc. They are very, very sensitive if you're using the older extractor systems on the guns. If you have a case jam in those bulge case and it jams in the chamber, you can actually break off the extractor hook in the gun if your cases aren't correctly sized. Okay, has any of you guys had that experience?
Nope.
I don't think
Nope.
I have.
No,
I haven't
it's,
shredded an extractor yet.
Okay.
No, I haven't either.
But have you had a situation where you've actually had to slam it onto a knee to pull the case out?
No, I've had problems with chambering, but not extraction.
Yeah, it usually
Shotgun,
comes up in chambering, not necessarily extraction, because you're supporting in the case. One of the problems that you get is that if you've got that, it'll if it doesn't go in. Did you work out where the actual problem was on the case? Why did it not go into battery?
No, I just took the round apart and reassembled it, shall we say.
Okay. One of the comments that we had for people is, how do I work out my ammunition isn't going in the gun, it doesn't go into the gauge, it doesn't go into the chamber, doesn't barrel drop? They can't work out why. And one of the tricks that we've found for people when they do this is you get out with the old permanent marker pen. Okay. You've all got one sitting in the kitchen somewhere. Okay. You get a case, coat the entire thing, including the bullet, in black permanent marker. Okay. Great. Let it dry, then barrel drop it. Especially if you've got one that has actually failed to go into battery, go into chamber. You barrel drop it. And you take the case out and you look at it and you have a look at it, and it'll give you a witness mark on where the problem is. Now, more often than not, people just simply can't get their crimp, or they haven't removed the flare, or they've overflared and they've over crimped and it's bounced back a little bit on the crimp. You see on the various forums, oh, it doesn't go into your case gauge, and everybody's saying, oh, put this die in or use these dies or everything else. What's frustrating for me in this, as a process of dealing with ammunition, is before anybody goes and says replace it, you notice nobody's actually worked out and says, well, where is the problem? You've got metal there, you can't see where it's going. Well, coat the the round in a marker pen, put it in the barrel, put it in a chamber, and work out where the problem is. The texture mark will give you a witness mark. It's bluing. It's been used in engineering and mechanical fitting since the cows have been out in the field. It's been very, very common. Jim?
We use Dichem high spot. I'm a machinist. Yeah. I'm the guy that walks in your office with a big hammer when you screw something up. You know what I'm talking about, but anyway, no.
Absolutely.
The thing is, I know exactly what you're talking about, where you have to scrape something with a carbide scraper to take and bring in stuff to fit, stuff like that, or where you're trying to make a flat surface. But to work with a chamber like that, I've never.
Marking,
yeah, exactly.
But it's such an incredibly simple process. And,
yes.
And I'm fairly active in a lot of the various forums, Reloading Central, the Dylan forums, etc. There's all really good advice. There's incredible depth of knowledge there. But one of the things that really surprises me in this entire process is not about the fact that they do understand their business, they do. But before you go and fix something, have you worked out exactly what the problem is? What am I missing here? It's like, Jason, you said you had a round that wouldn't go into your cylinder. If you coated that in black permanent marker, you would probably you'd find out where the actual problem was. Now,
actually,
does it mean it's the bulge in the base? Not
Kevin,
necessarily.
it was me, and because the problem was because I pretend to fire my bullets for my handgun, my revolvers, as cast. You know, they come out of the bullet hole 3.359. Well, you add 10 thousandths, 12 thousandths on either side for the case thickness. You know, you're getting close to the maximum diameter of the chamber.
Yeah, and that's a fair understanding. But when you're looking about, Jim, you're as a machinist and as somebody who's more than passingly competent in the technical area, you understand that and you see that as a risk. But when you're talking about the average person on the street who's reloading, we're trying to get the information to people out, not necessarily. I think you guys overall have got a pretty solid depth of knowledge in reloading, and that's not the question. But when you're talking about your listeners, if they've got a problem with ammunition, they can't fix it until they actually find out what it is, because by fixing it in inverted commas, they may in fact actually make it worse. Now, out of all of the ammunition that we're using, the 9, 38 Super, 40, 45, 223, 308, you name it, with the exception of maybe 2 conversions, one of which is the 38 Todd Jarrett, and maybe one other case, which is a really oddball case. Every single one of these cases was developed developed or modified as a hybrid from an earlier case. Like 223 was from the 222. 222 predates reloading. Reloading has really only substantially been done since about the 50s. Okay.
Careful.
About the
Careful. Reloading's been done since the days of the muzzleloader. Those guys are the original reloaders.
But they weren't brass cases and things. Yeah, I've played with muzzleloaders and they're good fun. Click, push, boom.
Yeah, exactly. I've done that and I hated it.
Look, I've got a trading British I've got a flintlock in the safe there, which we used to go and shoot toilet paper out of. No, it's actually the British company, British East India Company.
Okay.
It's a trading flintlock with the old metal boss on the back end. That's good fun. If in doubt, hit them over the head with the back end of it. That's what they used. It also has the collar for the ramrod, so that you don't lose it. And one of the things that came out of the American Civil War is that a lot of people got shot with ramrods. Why? Reloading, grading. Oh hell! Bang.
Yep.
So people got shot with. I've also got a Spencer carbine in the safe as well too.
Nice.
We've got some history on that, which is quite impressive actually. I'd love to be able to, if I got a little bit more of provenance, it could put another 2 zeros on the end of the price tag. But it's quite an impressive. But yeah, look, you're right about that. But we're coming back to the metal cartridges and brass cartridges. None of them were ever originally designed for reloading. Now, we've talked about this briefly earlier. Military. Okay. People talk about, I've got a mil-spec gun. And you see the memes on Facebook and everything. It says, don't call my guns military spec, mil-spec. They're much better than that. They can be. If you look at a guy who's wearing the greens and he's out in the middle of Middle East or wherever he is, he's fighting a guy who's hasn't got a sense of humor at the other end. He's not shooting targets. He's out there to save himself and do his job. What is their priority? What is the priority there? Is it Coke cans for a handgun we'll talk about? Is the guy using a handgun, is it his priority to be able to hit a Coke can at 50 yards or center mass at 10 yards after dunking it in the sand, rolling it around in the dirt, grit and crap everywhere? What is more important, center mass at 10 yards or Coke cans at 50 yards?
Reliability is the answer you're looking for, Kevin.
It goes bang. It goes bang. Why? If it doesn't go bang, then something gets really ugly. And that's what they realized. Like Second World War, the 45 ACP, people, they had all these guns just making these guns, and the damn things would jam up. Why? Because they're beautifully made guns. So what they used to do is they used to get in with a file, and if it didn't rattle as it came out of the shop, it was too damn tight. Why did they do that? Why? Because the mil spec says if you're trying to hit anything longer than about, say 30 yards, you got enough time to run to a gun, to run to a rifle, and get a bit more serious. I think Jeff Cooper was famous for saying that handguns only used to be able to run to fight your way to a rifle. Was that him that said that?
It was.
Okay. That's good counsel. So what is a military priority for a handgun? It's reliability. It's reliability. It's reliability. Oh, and if it can go sort of center mass at 10 yards, then they're perfectly fine with that. So how do they get reliability out of that? One, they don't use reloaded ammunition on front line.
Right.
Point blank. Factory ammunition is much, much more consistent. The second one they do that is they use an oversized reamer. It might be on the SAMI specification size, but it's certainly going to be on the upper end of that size. There's a tolerance there, and it's going to be on the upper end. So let's take that as one step further. Okay, what's the typical example of the military issue? You got the Berettas, your Glocks, you got the H&Ks. Do you think, okay, when people, let's use the example of Glock, which is a bit unfair because the Glock was designed for military law enforcement carry, and their priorities are all the same. Reliability, reliability, reliability. That's it. It's not Coke cans at 50 yards. You don't train for a carry gun to hit metallic silhouette at 100 yards. It's a waste of time. You go and get your Thompson Contender or something like that, which has got a different set of rules. So you get your military gun and they open up the chambers on them. They make the magazine springs super hard, super strong, so that it deals with if you've got any grit or anything else in the magazines. And they also run looser slide. They can often use looser slide to frame to barrel fitments. Why? It's been able to go. They also run much heavier recoil springs. Your mainspring on your hammer is likely to be anything between 17 and 25 pound, and your recoil spring is likely to be, what would you say, Jim, 16 to 20 pounds, even maybe 14 pounds on a 9mm, but on a 40 cal, what it would be, 16 pound, 19 pound?
Thereabouts.
Thereabouts. Okay. So if you've got a mil spec gun and you're actually doing that, you're going to have a loose chamber, so the case is going to swell out to the size of your chamber. But that's about it. Okay. But if you take something else here, instead of actually using that military gun, you're actually using it in competition. You're not going to use a 25 pound mainspring and a 16 pound or 18 pound recoil spring. No, you're going to take it down to a 12 and maybe a 15 pound mainspring. So what is that going to do? Your gun's going to unlock. It's going to be a lot easier to rack and slide. It's going to be a lot easier to unlock. You're going to modify your rounds from, say, let's say a 9mm factory ammunition would probably run a 140 power factor. If you're using reloaded ammunition, your ammunition is going to be about 130 power factor. Correct? About that. So you don't need a 19 pound. In fact, 130 power factor ammunition in a military issue sprung gun probably wouldn't even cycle. Okay, I've seen that happen. The guy gets straight out off the box, pulls it out, cleans the gun, bang, doesn't cycle. It sort of bounces back a little bit, but it doesn't go far enough to eject. So you change the springs. Once you change the springs on a lot of those guns, the issue of loose chambering and polished feed ramps or radius feed ramps and everything else like that, that gives reliability to those guns, all of a sudden, running out of battery a lot faster, even though it's a lower power factor, the burn rate and the pressure spike is still the same. So what actually happens to the case? Blows out a lot more. There have been a number of tests between the Browning action and the Colt link action for case and case performance. And they showed categorically that there was no difference in performance. Now, that's true, statistically true for factory high spring rate guns. But once you start talking about using a link action in a 1911 versus a Browning lug action, and you start talking about 9mm major loads and running 6 pound recoil springs, there's a whole lot of difference in there. Okay, who's been caught with 9mm, trying to reload 9mm major cases? You guys been caught with that?
Uh-uh.
Like
None of us compete. none of these people on this show right now compete.
Okay.
We have one competitor. He shoots 3-gun, but he likes to shoot, I believe. What does Travis shoot for his 3-gun, for his handgun? He likes to shoot at 2011, right? That's
Yeah, I thought it was a 2011.
45
But it's a 9.
but it's a 9.
I think he's
In-
shooting 9.
in-
Yeah.
Major or open or standard? Or
He's
limited?
shooting 3-gun. He's not shooting for IPSC or anything like that.
All right. Okay, so he'll be shooting
Um,
in limited. He'll be shooting 9mm limited.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
No, I think he shoots open because he's got optics.
Oh,
Okay. Or production
Anyway.
optics, or there's a couple of different rules. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you're running a 2011, when you're talking about shooting competition, high loads, high pressure loads, low recoil spring, light slides, etc., that's when things start getting really, really exciting. My open gun runs 166 power factor. It's a very light slide. It's an island barrel hybrid port, and it's running a 7-pound recoil spring and a 15-pound mainspring. But because it's been chambered correctly and it's been fitted extremely well, it works great. Now, I have a friend of mine who has got almost exactly the same gun, but he doesn't have a 5-link in my gun, but he has a 3-link in his gun. He has to run a 9-pound spring. Why is the difference? Well, it makes a big difference on the way the gun indexes and stays into battery. Now, you take the same issue and put that same arrangement in a 9mm major, but put it in a Browning action. Now, for those who are not aware, the Browning action doesn't have a link system. It has a lug system. It's like an L-shaped or a flattened out or a squished out L-shape or a J-shaped shape. It basically travels horizontally for a while, and then it hits a 45-degree slope and indexes the barrel out and out of the way. Now, that action, when you run light recoil systems, unlocks extremely quickly. Now, one of the there's a couple of different manufacturers, custom gun manufacturers of open guns in the US. You guys have you've got lots of good, really talented gunsmiths all around the place. And I was talking to one of them who is a well-known business, and I got into a lot of details with it. Why? Because we were there for 9 days, talking to each other about the guns, the setups, the indexing, and what he found. And this issue of cases coming out of battery before the pressure's gone down in the guns is a very, very real problem. When he first started doing his open guns, what he found was that the guns were coming out of battery too quickly and literally blowing the cases out on people's faces. Now, that's a little bit exciting for most people. I don't really enjoy that. Glasses are mandatory, and a new set of underwear is even more exciting, even more mandatory at that point. It gets really ugly. But the way he dealt with it is simply cut the horizontal section of the lug longer by about 2 millimeters. Doesn't seem like much, but that basically took the gun from blowing the cases out of battery and kept them in battery whilst the pressures blew down. But again, he did say, look, yeah, most of the guys who use our guns get short life out on, but fine, that's fine. They're supported guns, they're factory guns. They're a competition gun and they're a high maintenance item, but they also don't reload their cases. Now, if you're picking up those cases, you could reload them, but it'd be extremely unlikely you'd be able to reload them reliably without roll sizing, because it comes back down to the cases can't be sized correctly. Now, if the cases are bulged, the cases are offset, you try and size them, it'll chew out the case mouth, they won't chamber, and they won't fit reliably. Now, how does he deal with that? Well, that's part of his design. He goes, look, you guys could always buy cleaned, processed, once-fired brass very cheaply. Well, it's about 2 cents or 3 cents a case, is it? What do you guys pay ridiculously cheap prices for that? That's
Probably
what you guys
something in
use
that
with
neighborhood.
it? Yeah. So I
Probably
talk to a lot
something
of
in that
guys.
neighborhood.
Yeah. But at the moment, you've got a lot of your listeners will actually be finding the process. You'll be finding the process that says they can't get that brass, so now they're having to pick it up. So they're going to have to reload that ammunition. Now, what's happening? A lot of these guys are finding out it doesn't actually chamber and doesn't go feed reliably. It doesn't case gauge reliably. So why is that? It's because the sizing and the full length sizing die doesn't go full length, and they're leaving a lot of inherent problems in it. Now, when you full length size a case and you've got a really badly bulged case, how many of you have seen a little sharp ring around the base of the case just above the extractor groove? Yeah. Do you know what that's from? Jim, do you know what that little line is? What that means?
Sorry, I had myself muted. Yeah, to me, it always seemed like the head was actually overexpanded. Case head.
Yeah.
Or slightly overexpanded.
No, that's exactly what it is. What you're finding there is that that's actually the limit of where the sizing die comes down, but it also corresponds to where the webbing on the case is. So you're basically finding the limit of the webbing of the case. You've got reinforcement, a reinforcement at about 45 degrees from the solid brass base, comes up to the sidewall, and it's a blending. And that tends to be just a little bit below where it meets the case wall and the reinforcement. So when you cut them open, you can actually see a line. If you see that line further up in the case in a rifle case, that's a very good sign of imminent case head separation, and absolutely you've got to chuck them out at that point. But in pistol cases, you can actually reuse them if you roll size the case. Now, a lot of people have been asking, what exactly is roll sizing? Roll sizing is a simple concept, but it operates in an extremely complex way. But coming full circle, what it does is it takes a clean case. It can be primers in there or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. But the lawyer says you cannot roll size loaded rounds. Okay, we'll leave that as a clear disclaimer right now. Do not put live rounds through the machine. It could get ugly. So what happens is the case comes into the machine and it gets caught between a rotating disc and the outside base. Now, depending on which machine is, I've got three machines. There's a manual, there's a DC, and the commercial machine. They basically all do the same thing. And the key element is that it squeezes the base of the case. It squeezes almost all the case. But the key thing is that the roll sizing process only affects the section of the case that is stiff enough to be worked back and reshaped correctly. The top section of the case is an open can. What happens if you squeeze an open can? It springs back. So you can't do anything with it. So when people say, oh, I've got a roll sizer that rolls the entire case, crap, it doesn't work. You can't physically do that. I've tried. You can't do it.
No, I'm just
laughing.
I'm laughing at your Aussie sense of humor. That's all.
No, well, we get there, but we do get a lot of experts who have done that and said, "Oh no, I don't have to full length size after roll sizing." Yeah, unfortunately, you do, because you've got tapered cases, you've got bottleneck cases, you've got all those other processes that still require full length sizing. So the roll sizer comes down and it basically squeezes about a quarter of an inch, maybe half an inch, depending on the case, of the brass immediately above the extractor groove. That's the section that your full length sizing die is really limited in accessing. So when often you see a case that's been roll sized, you'll see the case that's bulged and stretched out. But if it's been roll sized, you'll often see a little dimple at the bottom where you can see the case has been forced concentric. Now people go, "Oh, what's the big deal?" I said, "Well, the key thing is that once you get the base squeezed in at the right dimension, this normal reloading process fixes itself out. You don't have the cases getting their mouth chewed out. It fits reliably in your magazine. It nestles in the magazine." So with the commercial machines, for an exercise to try and work out how we could destroy them, because at some point somebody was going to do it, we're roll sizing 9mm cases, and we actually squeezed a 40 S&W case down to a 9mm, and it actually worked too. Squeezed it down, not a problem.
What'd you do about the flash hole?
Sorry?
What'd you do about the flash hole?
Doesn't affect it. The roll sizing process does not touch the rims. It also does not touch statistically, when talking about statistics, I've actually got equipment that can actually measure flash holes and primer holes, etc. It doesn't actually affect the primer hole in any form. If anything, it might statistically reduce it marginally, but the variation you get in primers, it's such a complex area, but basically it doesn't affect flash hole. If anything, it might slightly reduce it, but I've measured probably 1,000 plus cases across all the different conversions, and we haven't found a statistical number that says there is any significant number variation. Measuring primers, your primers have a variance that is significant in variation in one blister packet of primers, and there's Winchester I found at the moment are the only ones we can get here, and they vary all over the place. Some of the Federal 100s are notoriously furry on the edges. CCIs I've personally found have been the best, most consistent because they've got nice sharp edges, clean edges. But primers are vastly more variable than the primer pocket holes in the cases. So we've not found anything that varies it. We've also found over worldwide feedback of guys who are running serious volumes. They have not found anything that suggests that the roll sizing process induces fatigue in the cases.
Well, I'm sorry. I just assumed that, when you reduce a 40 S&W case down to the diameter of 9 millimeter, that material has got to go somewhere, and I assumed that it went into your flash hole.
No, it actually bowed it out. It dished the instead of the base being flat, it tends to rolled it up. So it opened it on that particular example. Yeah, the primer hole moved, but in normal reloading process, such as 9 mil roll sizing, there's no variation at all there on any of the cases where it's rolled with the right process. But in the 40, when we rolled it down to a 9 mil, actually, I'm not even sure if I even measured that one. It was a bit of a giggle, actually. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, but it's also not a good idea. But under normal circumstances, I understand you wouldn't see any movement of metal. But in an extreme case like that, the machinist in me just comes out and says, "Where did the metal go?"
Yeah, and you're right. You're right. It's it bulged out. Now, one of the interesting things that comes out of it, one of the other machines available on the market does rim conditioning. Now, we've covered this directly, but not really explained the issue about rim conditioning in the process. Why don't you rim condition? Well, the answer is you can rim. The rim conditioning is often been blamed for rim. They call it rim bulge. Now, rim bulge is a direct result of cases blowing out eccentrically. When you see it looks a little bit pregnant on one side, the case shifts in the center. Now, when it goes up out of the magazine into the chamber, if you're running a tight chambered gun, what'll happen is that it's not the case that's moved, because the case will go in the chamber, but the rim has moved relative to the case. Okay, if one's the other, then what you're finding now. Is anybody here shooting a CZ or a European gun?
Shooting a what?
CZ or SPO1.
CZ. In American English, she's talking about CZ.
Oh, CZ. Yes.
Speaking real good. Okay, fine. Now, hey, Aussies, we call different things. So okay, we can talk about our slang, and you would probably wince. A lot of what you call have totally means, and when you say you root for the Phillies, that's a totally different meaning in Australia. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about specifications in guns. What a lot of people don't realise is that a lot of the European-based guns, CZ, Steyr, Sig Sauer, and a few of the others, they're made to a standard known as CIP. Now, in general, CIP specification guns are designed for SAMI specification ammunition. The only catch, though, is and this is where it gets quite complex. The CIP specification guns, Mike, I can see you've got loving attention from the dog there. The CIP specifications have a tighter breech face dimension. Now, on the CZs, your rim is actually encased in a breech face. Okay, so what happens if that breech face is actually offset to the chamber? Think about it. Okay, if it's straight down, if the bulge is straight down, it doesn't have a problem because it's where the feeding is from the groove. If you push it against the side that has the extractor, it's not a problem. However, if you go to immediately opposite side, the eccentric case goes to the other side of your breech face, what actually happens then? It jams. It doesn't go into battery. You're basically locking up the barrel, pushing the barrel to the side of the side of the slide, and the rim and the chamber and the barrel locks up completely. And it's damn near impossible to find. There's very few gauges in the market that'll actually pick that up. So if you see a case and it looks a bit wonky and it's a bit offset, it will probably go through, say, 3 out of the 4 times through your gun. But when it's indexed in that particular position, it is very, very hard to get out. Now, that's when you really it locks up, and as you see, Jim, the angle is very acute, it's very slight, it's almost into battery, so it's locking up really tight. You've got a lot of mechanical force to jam it in there. That's when you have to get in and hold the slide and slam your hand into the back of the beaver tail. Hopefully don't put the beaver tail into the web of your hand. I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen a few times, actually. Not pretty. But that's when you find it actually goes out. Now, this is a known problem with the CZ. It's not a problem. It's not a manufacturer. It's not a problem with the gun. It's not a reflection on the gun. The guns are extraordinarily good. They're probably one of the best production guns for competition in the market. They're really good quality. But they are made to a tighter tolerance. They're not a military tolerance. They're not a mil-spec tolerance for a carry gun. They're a competition gun. But with a competition gun, you have tighter tolerances. The CZ part is something, and the CIP specification is very poorly understood. If you're going to have, you're going to be running a tighter toleranced gun, and you're using random rangefind brass that has been blown out, bulged, and it isn't processed correctly, you've cleaned up and sized correctly, and I'm talking roll size correctly, you are going to have problems with this reliability. It is a very common problem. Now, when you're going through the big matches and the big competitions, one jam will take you off the podium. So what are you going to do? You can't afford, you're not going to be able to buy factory ammunition. You've got to reload. So if you're getting ammunition or once-fired brass, a lot of the guys are now finding it that they're expecting their customers, their suppliers, to have it roll size, but not all do. That's fine. But if you're reloading, you're picking up your own brass, and you're finding it's jamming in your gun, what you got to do is you got to look at why. And it comes back to this text to mark issue. If it jams in the gun, coat it in black permanent marker, run it through the gun, and if it goes through the second time, pull it out, coat it again, index it 45 degrees, do it again. If it goes through, then do it another time, index it 45 degrees, and all of a sudden it'll index it in one particular point. Now, how do you pick that? Well, first you've got to be aware that you've got to look for it. And the second, and a lot of case gauges will not pick that up. If you've got a case gauge that doesn't sit into your case gauge or chamber gauge, it won't pick it up. If it's sitting proud, or its design is sitting proud, it will not pick it up. Period. End of story. If your case goes all the way into the chamber, into the case gauge, but it is not a tighter specification case gauge, it's a chamber gauge, it's not a case gauge, it probably won't pick it up. Some do, some don't. If you have something like the Hundo or the shock bottles or Sheridans, there's quite a few other really good quality case gauges out there. They are case gauges, not chamber gauges. Remember the difference? There is a big difference between the two. The chambers are representative of the chamber. This is one of the reasons why the SEMI specification was set up, because you cannot reliably feed cases that are size for size chambered. They've got to be under the chamber to be able to feed in reliably. Small amount of grit, forget it, bang. It comes back to military. Military is loose chambered. Why? It's got to go bang reliably. In competition, we're a lot more controlled. If you drop your magazine in the dirt, we'll clean them out. Well, you should. We've all done that. We've all stuffed up and not done that. But it comes back down to, what are you looking for the gun? If you're looking at a tight chambered gun, you've got to be much more consistent with the process. The roll sizing takes the case base and gets it back to center of the rim, well within the specifications that the CIP allows. But if you have a bulge case and you don't deal with that, it will index and jam up. Now, some guys say, "Oh, but I've been reloading the same cases and the rim, it's the rim lockup, it's the rim bulge." Rim bulge does genuinely occur, but it really only occurs in machine gun fired or slam fired actions. You guys get access to all the really fun toys over there, but machine guns are something that we just don't get here.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of the Uzis, the short action or blowback action machine guns have slam fired actions or loose chamber actions. Now, when the case slams back into the breech face, it mushrooms the breech face. It usually when you're getting multiple reloads of those, you can see it actually looks like a mushroom. It actually is a bit dished on the back end of the case, and your primers don't tend to stay in either. But it does become a really big problem with regards to reliability. Now, those are really good examples of cases that are rim bulged, and at that point, hey, all bets are off. You can't physically reload those. Why? You can't squeeze the rim back in because the whole rim itself is actually blown out. The pocket's blown out. As you said before, Jim, where does the metal go? If it stretches out, it'll usually start stretching out at the middle of the case and blowing out. Those are unserviceable cases. The roll sizing process doesn't guarantee that you're going to get all your cases through, because if you mix a couple of machine gun fired cases in there, it's not going to work. But the way I've been able to pick that a serviceable case, can you read the head stamp on the case? Every manufacturer puts a head stamp on the case. The Starline one is nice and deeply grooved. Winchester, not so much. Remington, they've all got some sort of engraving on the back end of the case. Okay. So if you can't see that head stamp, what does that say to you? It's probably flogged. Throw it out.
Yeah, it's scrap.
It's scrap. Like, there is a limit. But usually what we've found is that the guys that said, "Oh, we want rim rolling and everything else." No, in order to get your rim rolling done, you actually have to not just shape the rim correctly, but you have to mechanically push the entire base, which is solid brass, back into concentric. That means you actually have to squeeze the primer pocket back. That is very, very hard to do. And if you're rim rolling and you don't deal with that, the problem is it then tends to cause you all sorts of grief. So that's one of the reasons why we don't offer rim rolling on the process. We can, and we have made them, but the problem is it makes it mechanically extremely difficult. The tolerances go aerospace, NASA type scientific level accuracies, and that becomes very expensive. But realistically, it's not necessary, because are you going to put another zero on the end of your price tag for a roll sizer process for a case that's worth 2 cents? No, you're not. And it's not viable commercially, but it's actually not necessary, because when you've got a case that badly stretched, the case is worn out, flogged out, primer pockets don't work, and you're better off just chucking it out anyway. But there's generally only probably less than 0.25% of the cases that we see when people have problems with ammunition are they actually machine gun fired cases. The first example is if you see a primer that is flatly extruded, super flat across the back end of the primer, When it extrudes the primer and welds it to the base of the case, it's dead flat. That's usually a good sign that it was probably fired in a high pressure machine gun case. It was probably a high pressure machine gun. The other one that we see is, how many of you guys have seen rangefinder brass that's got punctured primers? Yep, Jim, you've seen that? Okay. What we're seeing now is a lot of the processors are actually starting to use lead-free primers. Indoor ranges, the governments and various groups are starting to see lead-free primers come in. Lead-free primers are for some reason, I don't understand why, but lead-free primers are actually starting to puncture the primers very easily when they're being fired. With a punctured primer, decapping starts becoming a really big issue. There's very few processors that actually have a decapping pin that's big enough to actually reliably push that primer out. Firearms is the only one that I can think of that reliably pushes those out, that what I've seen. And the commercial processors that I've talked about have actually said that's probably the only one that they use. But if you're coming out of a military or a law enforcement training range where they do training there, there's a very good chance that that's actually a lead-free primer. Indoor ranges, they'll use full jacketed ammunition or a lead-free alloy in the bullet and a lead-free primer. It's health and safety issues, for the same reason why a lot of your ranges won't allow lead bullets. You got to use jacketed ammo. So that's actually one of the biggest things that we've found in that process. So it comes back down to, what are you actually trying to achieve with your reloading? Once you get your cases sized correctly at the base, everything else falls into place. One interesting exercise is that when you pick up your cases and you're going to reload them, have you ever noticed that they actually, when you sit them on a bench, they actually tilt? Shirenda, when you reload, have you actually seen any of your cases tipping over?
I have, especially when I'm on a roll and I get to the point where I'm just trying to hurry up and scoot them on over. It's like, God darn it. And I notice it's only on, I use mixed brass, so there's a couple of cases that may just be a little bit shorter.
Okay, but when it's tipping over or tilting, it's usually from two things. Either one, that possibly the primer is pushed out a little bit. Tends not to be very common though. If you've got a loose primer, it can do that. But the other reason, and this comes back to this issue of side bulge, if you've got a case that's tilted over, what happens is that it's stretched on one side more than the other. So if you stretch one side, what happens to the rest of it? Tilts over.
Oh, man.
If it tilts over, is that you've got to get that metal, that bit that's stretched out on that side, you've got to get it back to the center of the rim. So when you start looking at all of that, this is where the roll sizing process starts becoming very important. It's not necessarily about roll sizing, it's about getting your ammunition back to the right shape so that it then becomes reliable. There's not a lot of processes that can actually force that back into shape. This is one of the problems it causes with the Camdexes. They're a great machine, but they can't handle that extra load. If you've got a stretched case on one side or the other, it forces the tool head to move. That's why they size in a couple of different steps. If you've got a 650, 650 is a great machine, don't get me wrong. It's one of the best machines available on the market as a progressive press. But the problem is, if it moves, you can index your shell plate and take a chunk out of the case mouth. The other thing is that we find on the progressive presses that use a moving shell plate holder, such as the Lees, the Hornets, and the other ones, the 1050s and 1100s from the Dillon are a good example of a commercial grade support on the tool head. When you have an aluminium shell plate holder and your press comes down and you've got a heavily bulged case, what happens to the shell plate is it does this. Now, one way of being able to see that happening, if you've got as we covered the issue of the mechanical force in camming down on the reloading process, what happens? That bit pushes down because you're sizing it really hard, even with the cam over advantage. What happens on the other side of the round? The cases on the other side which are getting bullet seating depth adjusted. Well, you get shorter overall length, don't you? When we found
I
Yeah, go
noticed that on like a couple of different primers, like on the I can't remember if it's Remington or Federal. The
Mhm.
seating depth is a little bit longer than the CCIs, and I discovered that on accident last year and thought it was me.
Well, actually, no. There's something else, something weird about that. The design of the Federal primers is different to the most of the others. A Federal primer often has the anvil section in the primer cup sticking up above the primer cup. Okay, that anvil sticks up higher because in like the Federals, you can fit them in a drop tube. You can't actually fit all 100. Sometimes you can't fit 100 primers in the drop tube than you can with CCIs. The primer depths are different. And when I talked to the guys at Federal about that, they said that's actually, they do that because of the fabrication and transportation process. It's all to do with transportation, design, processing, and when the anvil sticks high above the unit, they still seat generally to about the same depth, but the Federals, sorry, the Federal 100s and the Federal 205s, the pistol and rifle primers, need seating in order to prime the anvil and seat the anvil tight. But pistol primers and rifle primers are different in depth. Most reloadable cases use primer pockets that are set up for small rifle. So when you such as 38 Super Comp is set up to us, it's a slightly different primer depth than if you're doing something like a 9mm. They will often set up for a small pistol. You can put a small rifle in there, but a small pistol will seat deeper than a small rifle. So if you're shifting between pistol and rifle primers, you will find a variation in seating depth, or you should find a difference in seating depth. Now, on mine, which is auto drive, I tend to set it at one particular depth and make it seat it quite hard, aggressively quite hard, and I only use small rifle primers anyway, and only operate with one particular brand of primers. But you guys have got a bit of a primer availability there at the moment, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
What's caused that?
More like not available.
Yeah.
What's caused that? I don't get that. You've got the most manufacturers in the world on your doorstep. Why can't you get them?
Couple things.
Hoarders.
That's part of it. That's a big part of it. Is when they do come in, people grab them right away.
Them out. Yeah. Toilet paper.
The other problem is the two most common ammos that have been desired during the COVID scare have been 9 and 223-556. So all the companies, ammo companies, are hoarding primers to make those cartridges.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, they're diverting the small base. They're diverting small primers into production.
You forgot about the third, Travis.
well,
Let me guess, he's got 100,000 there, has he?
So.
He might.
Yeah, he probably has a semi-load.
The actual third reason is some of the offshore primers that we used to get.
Right, offshore.
We can't get now. We can't get Wolf anymore, and that we used to.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of guys, the commercial guys, that said that they would bring in a container load, and they've been back ordered for like 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah, they can't. Wolf can't be brought in anymore. I guess that was part of the embargo, along with one of the Russian ammos or something. And the other thing is like Cellier and below hasn't been able to come in because of shipping. So
ships are being held offshore because of COVID-19.
Yep.
Well, that's funny because most of the shipping that I'm doing from Australia, it's not been affected.
Yeah.
I'm surprised about the ships being held off because it's not affected. Australian shipping really hasn't been affected whatsoever. I think the guys, when they come into port, they tend to have to be told to stay on the boat. But as far as the actual shipping products offshore, air freight is obscenely expensive. Like, it's doubled and tripled in price. But as far as sea freight, it hasn't really changed that much. It's gone a little bit slower, but it really hasn't changed that much. So I'm surprised about that. But with CPI, Federal, Winchester, I'm surprised those guys haven't ramped up, or did they just shut down because of COVID for a period?
They were shut down.
Yeah. They were all
Wow.
shut down for at least
6 weeks, wasn't it, Mike?
I don't think some of them weren't that long, but yeah, it was at least almost a month. So
the one of the things that the guys from Federal, when I talked to them at SHOT a couple of years ago, their comment was what they sell to Australia is made in half of one shift in one day. So
yeah,
like the manufacturing capacity for those companies is nothing short of phenomenal. But and that's the reason I'm still trying to understand it. With the COVID, so much stuff being shut down. Where's the production? It's being protected by your second.
There is no understanding it. It's not logical. You're trying to make logical out of nonsense.
Yeah.
So like politics and gun laws, right?
I didn't want to use that word on this show. Politics.
Yeah, pretty much. So we got a couple questions for you, or at least we got at least one more. K24 wants to know, what's your opinion of the Lee factory crimp die?
Look, it's a very good product. If it wasn't a good product, a lot of people, it wouldn't buy, it wouldn't sell, and it wouldn't be around for long. It's been around for a long time. I've used them myself. The question is, does it work for you? And if it works for you, bless you, my son, go forth and continually use. They're not terribly expensive in the scheme of things. So if it works and it gives you the reliability you're looking for, absolutely, they're fine. I use a Lee crimp die on my 243, and I get obscenely accurate results for it because of consistent neck tension. And consistency in your ammunition is the most reliable. It's not about like you can practice to the cows come home, but if your ammunition doesn't match up to what you're doing, then you're stuffed. And a lot of people get very good results for that. I've used them. I've moved on because the system with the process, I didn't need the crimp die, and it was starting to. We use a lot of lead bullets in Australia, and the Lee crimp dies tend to work around the factory ammunition, which is 355 jacketed, whereas we use 356, 357 lead. What we found is that with the Lee crimp die, you tend to push the size of the lead down a little bit more than you otherwise would have done. Mm-hmm. That doesn't always work with some guns, but for me personally, I didn't need to use it anymore. And it's a great die, but if it works for you personally, go for it.
Okay.
Absolutely, they're a good product. There's a lot of very good products out there, and there's more coming out all the time.
That's one good thing about the internet, because we communicate with each other frequently about ideas and products. If we got a lousy product, 2 or 3 people start spreading the word, pretty soon that product's off the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about the en masse information, is because, that's a piece of crap, that's a piece of crap. I don't like that, because in that particular person's application, it's wrong. It's like, do I have a problem with small base circle dies? Well, no. If it works for you, go for it. My biggest issue is I'm not talking about the roll sizer process that we find is not necessarily required for everybody. Why? People have been making reliable ammunition for 50, 60 years without a hiccup. Not a problem. But when you start talking about moving to the outer limits, you're looking about that extra degree of reliability. The roll size process then starts working in those areas where you can then justify an investment, which they're not cheap, but they're not cheap bits of gear, but they're not cheap in their own right. They could easily pay for it. In some cases, the commercial application, you could pay for a completely new press. But the roll sizer process is about doing something that no other process in the market does. You physically cannot do what a roll sizer does by any other means, including dies, and that's my opinion. But when we talk, but the thing is, does that mean people have to get a roll sizer? No, it does not. If you can use a small base die or a Lee factory crimp die, which are all very good products, and that gives you the level of reliability you want, great. What we find is people, when they start using roll sizes, they go, oh, I don't actually need to case gauge anymore. Great. Okay. What's that time worth to you? We had one customer who would say, he started roll sizing. He would reload and then spend 4 hours. He would reload Saturday and Sunday or Friday night and Saturday extensively and shoot Sunday and pretty much spend the whole day shooting on Sunday. What he would do is he would actually go roll size everything. And he found that for 99% of his use, he never needed to case gauge anymore because he got the reliability. Whereas previously, without case gauging, you would find that 5 in every 100 would jam in his gun. With roll sizing, he didn't need to do that. Now, does that mean you have to use a roll sizer? No, you can case gauge and that's fine. But how much is your time worth? Like, this guy was actually going and then having dinner with his kids on a Friday night, and that was something he didn't do. And the letter from his wife explained that, said, "Thank you very much." His wife. Well, it's time. We're all busy people. Like I tend to start work at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm talking to people in the US at 11, 12, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning that night. Why? Because that's the business. That's my business. But this is the guy. If it's about time, if you're time poor, cash positive and time poor, then the roll sizer makes it simply because it saves a lot of time. If people are looking for that extra advantage and that extra degree of reliability, it starts making sense. But does that mean you're the average person on the street who just plinks once a month down at the range? Yeah. But they probably don't even reload themselves. They probably don't. They just will go and buy a box of ammunition once a month and that's it. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's not all things for everybody. But if you're buying processed ammunition, you're buying processed cases, and you're getting reliability issues after you're reloading it, then you should be asking, why isn't it being roll sized and getting it consistent? Because that's what it's about.
Automatically.
Shirenda, are you talking to us?
Nope, sorry.
So what do you see as the biggest change in the market over there with the shooting? Everything I'm seeing at the moment is there's a huge increase in uptake in reloading. Dylan was back ordered for months and months and months. And what happens with Dylan is pretty indicative of the entire market. People were
still digging out,
taking stuff out of scrap brass out of the scrap metal merchants and buying it back to process it. Like some of this stuff is pretty ugly. Scrap brass is now worth more reloaded now.
Yeah.
So what's happening is, do you think that's going to change in the next 6 months, 12 months?
12 months, yes. 6 months, no.
Mm-hmm. How much is the COVID affecting everybody for shooting? People are trying to get out and do a lot more shooting.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things is I'm sure that probably contributed to it too. Well, so a couple of weeks ago, I went through numbers of all the NICS checks for the last few years, and then up till July 31st. And up to July 31st is, if it even somewhat trends, is going to be blowing every record out of the water by the end of this year. So, and they're estimating, just to give you an idea, April, May, June, July, 3 million background checks per month. 40% of those background checks are brand new first-time firearm owners.
Wow. Well, if in doubt, put a COVID in there and go and buy a gun.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of one of the big things is you get that huge change. So.
Okay. I just need to take time out for a sec. I'll come back in a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so while he's taking a time out, anybody else in the chat got questions? Because otherwise we're going to wrap it up pretty quick.
Wrap her up, Mikey. Just know that I'm jealous as hell of you, Shirenda. You got down there with Chico. You didn't say a word to anybody. Nobody knew your travel plans.
Right?
That's smart. Smart.
It was one of those where some of my boss and manager are on my Facebook or social media. So just in case they were like, you got a quarantine, I was on a low.
Yeah.
What'd you do? Drive or fly?
Heck no, I flew. And it was the most oddballest, weirdest things. Like you have to have on a mask to go on the plane, unless you're eating or drinking, and it's like WTF.
Right? Yeah, the mask rules are just absurd, but we're not going to get into those now because we could be talking about those for a couple
We
days.
need to wrap the show up.
So
Yeah, that's a whole new conversation in its own right, isn't it?
right.
But luckily enough, Australia was pretty lucky with all of that. The only real problems we had statistically was cruise ships.
Oh yeah.
They had about 5 or 6 cruise ships, and they've pulled in about 80 or 90% of our COVID cases directly related to those 5 cruise ships, and they were known as being sick on the ship. But
yeah,
what do you say?
Right.
So, with Mike and guys, with what you're hearing, with what's changing in the market, with all these new people coming into the market, a lot, and the ammunition prices going high, what do you see is happening with regards to knowledge? Because we're often all taught how to shoot and how to shoot safely, not shoot us or the person next to us when we go down to the range or join a club. But personally, I've seen one of our biggest problems is that we don't talk to people about reloading. We don't teach them how to reload safely or
Right.
competently. What do you see is happening in the market over there?
Definitely an increase in the desire for knowledge. The Facebook group that we have for this podcast quadrupled in size in 3 months.
Wow,
So,
that's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely what we're about to start off on in the next couple of weeks is we're actually starting with shotgun, then we're going to go to pistol, and then we're going to go to rifle, and we're going to do from the beginning, from the jump. So we're going to go through and do that, and we're going to do that with video and audio. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the big thing is there are people that are asking. I work at Cabela's gun store, or Cabela's at the gun counter part-time. And probably every 4th customer asks about reloading. So
very interesting, because what we found when we started out the business is that the US is very clearly our biggest market, which is understandable because every second or third person's got a gun. But percentage-wise, you guys have been so lucky for having so much cheap ammunition. It's reman or just new factory ammunition that you've never had to. Now, whereas comparatively in Australia and New Zealand and probably a lot of other countries, almost if you shoot then and an active shooter consistently shooting, you reload. If you go out hunting, even you only shoot 40, 50 rounds, you reload. Why? It's stupid expensive otherwise. Weekend shooting can cost you $100 without a hitch, whereas reloaded it might be $20 or $30.
Yeah,
it's too expensive otherwise, and that seems to be consistent with what when we talk to guys at SHOT Show and the other shows. The average knowledge of reloading isn't quite as deep as we would see in some of the other countries where reloading is the standard, not usual. Would that be right with you guys?
I would say yes.
There's obviously very talented, very knowledgeable people out there, but what we are seeing, and you look at the forums that I'm fairly active on, not necessarily to push the product, but it's actually my business is about actually understanding information, and then people can make a calculated call whether they then buy my product or use a Lee Factory Crimp die or an undersized die or whatever else. And it comes back down to if their person's situation demands, then they'll often get one. But once they get that, they then tend to say, well, hell, why didn't I get this before? I said, well, it's expensive. They're not cheap. But it comes back down to knowledge and understanding what's happening with case shapes. And Jim, as your background as a machinist, understanding tolerances and sizing, that's the first thing is that you want this 21 millimeters, okay, or 1 inch diameter. Yeah, okay, 1 inch exact or 1 inch plus or minus what? That's machining. And
that's right.
There's tolerances and sizes for everything, and people don't necessarily understand that. And part of that's also confused by the fact that some of the reloading companies say yes, Coke bottle is a perfectly acceptable shape in 9mm.
No.
Says who? Says who?
Well, don't forget, Gaston Glock said that nobody should reload.
Yeah.
Didn't know that one, actually. Yeah, that's pretty
Well,
cool.
the other thing is, too, you're not allowed to use lead bullets in a stock Glock barrel. Well, I've been doing it for, since 2010?
Oh, well,
Lead
90
bullets, not pure lead bullets, cast bullets. I'm a bullet caster.
no, yeah, but proper brittle hardness lead
Exactly.
bullets. 99% of the pistol shooters in Australia use coated lead, powder coated or epoxy coated or the inox coated or whatever, the super high tech stuff. They use their own version of that, 2-part or whatever. So, yeah, but you learn very quickly about running a lead bullet, a poorly cast or an incorrect hardness bullet through a barrel.
Yeah.
You'll lead up pretty quickly.
Clean that thing, stroke that bitch.
Yep.
Put that Lewis lead remover down through that thing. God almighty, what did I do?
Uh-huh.
Well, we see that a lot. We see that a lot when people come up and start making bullets for the first time. I tend to sort of steer clear for them for the first year or so whilst they work out how to get their coating consistent.
Yeah, well, they also have to learn about who the Tinsel Fairy is.
Uh-huh.
Tinsel Fairy?
Yes, sir.
Come on, out with that one.
It's what happens when you get water under the surface of molten lead. You get an instant steam explosion, and this lead goes flying, molten lead goes flying everywhere, including on my face, on my forehead, and on my anything, a place I don't have protected.
No, I haven't personally experienced that, but I've worked in hot metal smelters, so yeah, the odd bit of slag in the wrong place can be really spectacular. Makes the 4th of July look
Think
great.
about putting I know somebody accidentally threw a live round in a lead pot.
Oh.
Whoops.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Did he need new undies for that?
He went to the doctor for that one.
Oh, well. The lowest common denominator is pretty low at times, I can tell you.
No kidding.
That's right. We've all learned. We've all made mistakes, and I've certainly made more than my fair share in 30 years of engineering.
Yeah.
But the first thing I've always found is you ask lots and lots and lots of really dumb questions, and they go, "Oh, that's stupid. That's stupid. Oh, I've never thought of that one."
Yep.
That was my business for a long period of time as a consulting engineer. I'm a ferret. I'm a technical ferret. I go and ask. I would talk to this person over here and this person over there and ask them their opinion and ask them the same 10 questions, and I'd get 10 different answers. But when you add them all together, 90% of the answers had the solution there. You just didn't ask the right question to the right people. Yep. And then you had to filter it a little bit to take opinions and sort of myths and stuff out of it. But that is where I find about this whole reloading process comes in. There's some very good knowledge out there, but the ones who tend to have the really good knowledge tend to actually hold back quite a lot, simply because you've got just use this. This is the solution.
Right.
But nobody ever asks them, where's it going wrong? Look at it carefully. Look at the ammunition. If I'm on the range, I shoot Saturday and Sunday at our local club in Orange Grove in Perth. If somebody has reliable problems, they tend to, Kevin, here's my ammunition. This is what's going on. And I feel it. I just check the cycling, see the loading. If necessary, I'll chronograph it. And I'll show them on the whiteboard with a marker, this is what's happening. And the reason you're tumbling your 9mm is because you're over crimping. Oh, no, I'm not. Yeah, you are.
Exactly.
Yep.
And this black terminate marker, you go from a cut bullet that's seated in the case, in the reloading, you coat the entire thing. It's not a crimp. It's removing flare. Like the SAMI spec says, it should be seating on the case mouth. Super's the same. Revolver's the only one there that you can get away with roll crimp, but even in SAMI spec, it doesn't actually show a roll crimp, but it is perfectly fine to do that because you're seating on the rim. But if you're running a semi-rimmed or rimless case, and you don't have a profound mouth, then you need to make sure that your shoulder, if you've got one, or your extractor grooves and your setup there is going to be very accurate. I've seen people blow the guts out of their gun by over crimping. The extractor didn't catch it. It's flicked up into the chamber and it was halfway down the barrel. And like we would look at it and I've got a squib rod, which is machined very accurately to just fit inside a 9mm barrel. And when I put the squib rod down there, guess what? The case was halfway down into the rifling because he had oversized his case. Now that got exciting. Well, massively overcrimped, and he was swearing black and blue that it was perfectly fine. What was happening when you overcrimp a case? What happens to the case mouth? It springs back out.
Yep.
It does happen. It does happen.
It's called springback. It's called springback. It's metallurgical phenomenon of brass.
Yeah, you work it too hard and it'll bounce back.
You bet.
And it comes back down to when most people ammunition often will come down to if they're getting tumbling, it's overcrimp. In my experience, it's overcrimping. Or occasionally they've got an oddball chamber that is oversized, and they need to go up one size and they're lead. But that's actually pretty rare. But overcrimping on 9mm is especially because it's a tapered case and people can't read how to do a crimp on it. It isn't discussed very aggressively. And also the other one is the bulge, or the case bulge. And when you oversize a case, if you use an undersized die, the middle of the case shrinks in because your sizing die can't go full depth. It blows the middle of the case in aggressively because that's a function of actually trying to use a small base die. It actually, the Coke bottle shape on your case becomes much more aggressive.
Uh-huh.
If you can see a visual Coke bottle case, it's too much. That's well outside. You go back to the SAMI specifications. When they designed those specifications, the Browning and the rest of the guys, Gaston and all the rest of those guys, they looked at the tolerances and they said, we will design it to be 100% reliable within that range. But if you measure a 9mm case with a really aggressive Coke bottle shape, you measure that. That's actually smaller than the bullet. Okay, it is, because you can see the base of the bullet there. It's smaller than the bullet. So what happens when you're actually going in the magazine? It hits the magazine lips and sticks straight up. It's great in the morning, but not in the magazine case. You go through the rest. But sorry, guys, that's right.
You're not going to get away with much with this panel. You know that.
But you come back single stack magazines, Coke bottle shape. You've got the only control you've got there in your cases is a very narrow lip on the magazines. If you're very aggressive Coke bottle shape, the magazine will stick up. If you have a case that hasn't been blown out, you then find it will nosedive. So this issue of Coke bottle shape is such a massive issue I see in reliability. Why? Because that's what people have always been doing. You go back to square one and go back to the standard sizing dies work perfectly well, but they're limited on how far they can size. You get the base sorted out correctly, everything else falls into place. One of the reasons we talk to guys about what sizing dies we recommend, and I say standard sizing dies, not undersized. 9mm, Dillon sizing dies are perfectly acceptable, but they don't go down far enough, in my opinion. Why? Shell plate, as we've covered. You size that correctly with a roll sizer, and all of a sudden everything falls into place. Now, most other people, you don't want it too small. It won't fit in the mag, but it won't seal against the chamber. If you've used an undersized die, you'll often find black soot marks halfway, 3/4 of the way down the case. Now, what's that doing? You're getting gas erosion on the chamber. You shouldn't be getting it. The reason there's a tolerance there is because that tolerance is the range in which the cases will swell and seal against the chamber, push the bullet down range, and still, as Jim said, spring back and eject. It's all tied together as part of a neat system. So once you start screwing around with that and getting it out of spec, everything else falls apart. Now, the problem is so few people are looking at carefully as to what their actual results are. Just because they get away with it doesn't mean it's a consistent, reliable thing. When you're talking about reliability, you should be, with your reloaded ammunition, you should be doing a couple of thousand rounds before having a failure.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, then the process, I think, in my opinion, needs to be cleaned up a little bit better. But the problem is none of the cases were ever made for reloading. We're always dealing with a compromised process.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's such a complex area, but you get it back to square one with processing and get the shapes right. Everything's cool.
Yep.
That's where it comes from my side of the world. I'm boring. Yep. I hate having ammunition failures.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So what do you reckon, Jason? Still awake?
He's working on it. So
he's working on it.
He's about half. He's had 3 gin and tonics by now.
Ooh.
Well, no,
he man up, mine up, but it's 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah, usually he's in bed by now. That's his problem.
Yeah, I gotta get up at 4:30 in the morning. I need to get up. Jets, I have to take. I'm going to sign off. Good night, Joe.
No worries, Jim. Is there anything else you guys want to cover with me? Any particular questions or any processes?
Pretty much wraps it up for now, but yeah.
I got one. Just typically roughly ETA, what's your shipping looking like currently? Shipping to the States?
Depends. I'm doing, most of my products are actually being shipped and stocked in Houston, Texas, en masse. The COVID has affected a bit of that recently with sales going ballistic. Depending on which type of machine, I've got stocks of manual roll sizes, DC roll sizes in Houston now. The manuals will be there next week. The DCs are there now. I've got a few left. Commercial roll sizes are a availability issue. I should be able to ship those in 110 volt machines in about 5 weeks' time. I'm taking back orders for those now. I will have 220 volt commercial roll sizes available in Houston in about 3 weeks, thereabouts. They're good if you've actually got 220 volt supply at the house or the factory, wherever people are reloading. The commercial guys tend to like those. That's why I've sent them over there. But aside from that, it's going to be a very limited stock. I'll have 50 commercial roll sizes available in Australia in about 5 weeks' time, and I'm taking back orders on those, and I've already got 3/4 sold.
Yeah,
and they haven't even landed in Australia yet.
Yeah.
But normally I have stock and I have conversions ready to go sitting in Houston, and that's 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
If I have to send it from Australia, no. I don't generally. My deliveries are measured in days normally. Okay. Conversions are always sitting. I got a guy asking, can I bring in Bertram brass? Yeah, possibly. He's an Aussie manufacturer. I've got a fairly extensive shipping process, so we know where it's all going and how it's coming in. But my biggest problem is being able to get the right quality standard machinery. The machinery that I buy is made, the gearboxes and motors is made in China, but it's made to an engineering specification. It is made to a higher standard than the big mining companies do. And there's a very, very good reason for that. That's one of the reasons they last so long, but also why they do what they do for the product. We see occasionally somebody says, I'll just go and make my own. Go for it, sunshine. And I love it because I know they're going to blow 4 times as much money as it would cost for them to buy a machine when they realize that they can't make them. It's technically and dimensionally very, very difficult. So yeah, normally we have everything sitting in stock in Houston, spares parts and everything, that's all sitting there. And if I have to ship it from Australia and it's in stock, a week and a half. Might be 2 weeks if it's missed a flight in Singapore and a connecting flight. The prices that I quote in on the website, which when people look up on Webline from the US, is in fact a delivered, no additional cost price. I only do a delivered price in the US because if I've got it in Houston, it'll ship out of Houston. If I have to send it from Australia, that's my cost. Now, a commercial roll sizer weighs about 60 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something you're going to pick up with one hand. No, it's bend your knees and keep a straight back. They're a heavy sucker. They really are. So they're
have the three
very
different
expensive
options.
to ship. Say again?
I said I like you have the three different options.
Yeah. What surprises a lot of people is the little manual one is about half the size of a tissue box, but if you connect it up to an electric drill, you can actually do about 2,500 cases an hour. Now, it'd be pretty boring after an hour holding an electric drill, but if you're shooting 500 cases on the weekend, that's about the amount of time it'll take to have a beer.
Yep.
Or less. Jason, is that about beer duration? Or a gin and tonic duration?
Either one. I'm good with it.
Either one.
Yep.
And that's why we do it, because that little machine is $6.99 on your doorstep, and it's tiny, but it doesn't mean it doesn't actually do this. It does exactly the same thing as the commercial machine, but it is a simple, cost-effective product. Now, it will do something that no other machine can do.
Yep.
And they're reliable. The DC machine is a complete machine. You can plug that in straight to the wall. It has some very, very good, high quality industrial components in it. They're rated, it varies between the actual opinions, but the DCs, before they wear out the brushes on the DC motors, should do anywhere between 1 million and 2.5 million, depending upon the opinion we talk to. But that's a million cases on average. And
Right.
we know one guy who's got one of the DC machine, is using it in a commercial application, and in 3 months he's done over 750,000 cases, and it's still running fine. It's just plugging away. It's not a problem. And the commercial machine will do that. The DC machine will do 1,500 cases an hour. It varies a little bit because depending on the type of cases, but it is an over-designed machine. And the commercial machine will do over 6,000 cases an hour.
Wow.
My biggest problem with the commercial roll sizer is the case feeder. The case feeders cannot keep up. There's only a few options available on the market, but one of them is a very easy solution, which is available from Immortal Arms in Virginia. They do a case feeder upgrade kit for the Dillon, which is a very, very neat system, and it also includes reverse, which is important because it's a Dillon case feeder. The other one is you can get a Hasgrop case feeder, which is a completely new design, which will provide that. And a lot of the commercial guys that we talk to go for the big 16-inch MA case feeders, and these things are more expensive than the roll sizer itself. They're $2,500, $3,000, $4,000 depending on what you get. And that's what they use for commercial applications, running day in and day out. And I know one guy who's burnt out 3 MA case feeders, and he's still running the original roll sizer.
Nice.
So, but yeah, and the thing is, they're all compatible with parts. The machines that we sold 3 years ago, they can ring up and they can buy. Oh, I want another disc. Yep, send it out. Not a problem. Oh, I want a conversion for this machine. Yep, same conversion, same disc, fits on the same, gives the same result. And it's not a particularly hard process to convert the machines. It's literally 2 bolts to do a caliber conversion on a roll sizer.
Nice.
30 seconds, maybe a minute if you've got a beer in one hand.
Yeah.
and
Awesome.
that's the fun part. And there's very little that can go wrong with them. They're pretty bulletproof. They're a very simple looking machine, but there's not a lot to go wrong with it. There's only about 3 parts on it that can break, and they're pretty rare. And they're designed to break. If you jam something up, it doesn't destroy the machine. It bends a high-tech spring wire lever, and that's an easy replace. That's a good insurance policy. Whereas if you want to do that with a Case Pro, you have to stop the machine and go and pull out those little plastic shear screws, and they don't process that quickly anyway. Yeah. But anyway, so you guys got any other questions?
I think that pretty much covers it for now.
That's all I have for the moment.
Okay, nothing more, Shirenda? You need more coffee, do you?
Actually, yeah, I'm gonna probably have another cup and then go lay down. Coffee helps me sleep.
Well, I've got my priority is to put some big orders together and get some more parts made. We'll be doing another major shipment to the US in about 5 weeks' time, and that'll be with the finished machines.
Nice.
So it's a funny little industry. It's all being done out of a small place in suburbia, and we keep it nice and quiet for the neighbours. But it's amazing. The turnover and the level of interest is great. These machines have been sold to 42 countries worldwide now.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, that's pretty much it for me. Anything else, guys?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. So.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight and sharing.
Yeah, thanks for all the info
pleasure.
And talking about the machine. And it's nice to, like when we talked at SHOT Show, it was just a quick little blurb because you've got all these other people that are around and everything. So it's nice to be able to really be able to talk. So.
No, that's good. It's well, I'm hoping to do SHOT Show again next year, but I'm not sure if it's going to go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm expecting it to be cancelled, but hey, they're very unforgiving with regards to cancelling your booth. Even though they've run out, there's a lot of people have just pulled out. Period.
Yeah. Well, they're also talking about moving into that other building, so they're looking for more people again this year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'd like to say that would be a great idea, but you've got a 4-day show, or 3.5-day show, really, for most people.
Yep.
You can't see it all.
Nope.
Like you can only see maybe 20% of it, 30% of it now. Having it a lot bigger, but my biggest concern is they've got so much ancillary stuff. Yes, it is a outdoor hunting expert, but but they have supplier showcase at the start and then they have SHOT Show at the end of it. They're mixing it up with suppliers in the middle of the SHOT Show and keeping out genuine manufacturers, gun companies and things like that and putting them in showcase. It just seems a little bit of an oddball combination.
Yep.
But anyway, that's pretty much it for me. I've got to get in and go and chase down and get a little bit of work done.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. Good
night.
Hey,
guys.
Or good
Hey,
morning.
good night. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
Yeah, prepare to survive. Good luck. Nobody's got small pistol primers. So thanks everybody for hanging out. Mark, sorry, this is a really long one and there's not really much dead air. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna owe you a 6-pack for editing this one. So just awesome information and some of the stuff that we don't necessarily think about. So and that's kind of a cool thing. So he sends out a document that he wrote up, little article and blurb on, kind of summarizes stuff. I'll make sure I include the link to that in the show notes because I have a copy of it. And so we'll make sure we get a link to that in the show notes. And just thanks everybody for tuning in. And thanks to everybody that joins us on a regular basis. I'm just going to add in the sign off because it's been almost 3 hours now. So, yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
It did.
So, I mean, we're 3 hours past Jim's bedtime. So,
Paul Nelson said put it on Discord too.
Yep. So, all right, gang. So, yep, I'll post it on Discord too. So, on that note, good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.